YouTube. Okay, thank you. This meeting is now being live streamed. Good evening. Welcome to the Licensing Committee held on Tuesday, 28th of November. My name is Councillor Kelly. I'm chair of the committee. Obviously, we are committee membership. I have received apologies from Councillor Gallant, who has kindly arranged for substitute. So welcome to Councillor Kumar in substitute. I have not received any other apologies from members. So first, if we could go to the minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, the 6th of June. If anybody has got any comments, it's page 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8, 9, and 10. So I'll take silence as tacit approval of those minutes. Thank you. So that takes us on to the first item, the Licence and Hearing Enforcement Update Report, which is going to be presented by Isabel Gregory, Regulatory Services Operations Manager for Ealing Council. And we're also joined by Superintendent Sean Lynch and PC Bradshaw, James, who obviously will be perhaps taking some questions that. I'm also joined by Jess Murray. Jess, remind me of your title, Assistant Director?
Yeah, Assistant Director of Community Protection, Councillor.
There we are. Yeah, that's thank you very much. So Isabella, if you'd like to go, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Kelly, and good evening, everyone. My name is Isabella Gregory, and I oversee work of the licensing team and other regulatory services teams. And I'm here today to give you an update on the latest subcommittee hearings and decisions, and also to provide you with an overview of the licensing enforcement activity. At the end, I'll also provide you with some information in relation to additional funding that we've managed to secure for proactive work across trading standards and our licensing compliance team. Just for clarification, this report is just for your information only. Starting with the licensing hearing update, the report I've provided to you covers the period between March and 13 hearings. Out of those for new.
Isabella is fading in and out. Is that what you're getting, member?
Yes.
I'll turn off my camera if that's okay. Maybe
that's
okay.
Yeah, just as you were getting into it, you were fading away. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Apologies for that.
I'll turn. Yeah, others can turn their cameras off. It may give you some more bandwidth. So
perfect. Thank you. I'll turn it on later on for questions. So just to kind of summarize, we've had 13 hearings, and out of those, 4 related to new premises applications, 2 variations to existing licenses, and 1 determination as to the temporary exemption notice. So TENS, as they're commonly known, very rarely actually come in front of the committee, as quite often the time periods we work into are quite short. But it was really good to see that with the agreement and at the very end, where the agreement couldn't be reached between the responsible authorities and the applicant, the committee stepped in at the very last minute, and on this occasion allowed the event to go ahead. We have had also 6 premises license reviews brought on predominantly by our in-house licensing team, who submitted 5 applications, and 1 by the Safer Communities team, which was the first review submitted by that team. So you may have seen that review actually was quite widely publicized, and I personally thought it was a very well put together application to review. And it surrounded an off-license in Hallenwell alleged to be contributing significantly to antisocial behavior and street drinking issues in that area. It was a really good example of joint working, as Safer Communities team was supported obviously by our licensing colleagues. And we had a number of agencies, including the police and James on this call, helping Safer Communities team on bringing this review for consideration. And I hope that with the help of some of the additional funding I'll discuss later on, you will see more activities like this. Going back to the licensing subcommittee decisions, I know that we have had some new members on the panel, so it's really reassuring to see that there's still that variety in decisions that we look for, which suggests that we should judge each case on its own merits, and you've got the summary of those decisions provided to you in your report. Moving on to our kind of enforcement activity, we follow our usual calendar year, where between April and October, we prioritize inspections and licensing of our massage and special treatment premises. So our MSTs, those are kind of your type of beauty salons, tattooists, and saunas, etc. Those sort of premises are required to be registered with us, and the license expires every year on the 31st of March. And I recall at the last meeting, there were a number of questions in relation to MST premises. So it's perhaps worth mentioning here that throughout September and October, the government has been consulting on changes to the licensing regime. And some of the topics for consultation included introducing age limits, licensing unregulated cosmetic procedures. So, for example, your Botox, which again we discussed at the last committee meeting, dermo fillers, which are currently not licensable, and then introducing mandatory training requirements, and also interestingly categorizing treatments into the green, amber, and red categories, depending on the risk, which would then determine precautions needed. And at the moment, unfortunately, it's too early to give you an idea of what the changes might be. But it's very likely that the beauty industry will be more regulated, which is definitely welcome from our perspective. As to the current activity, we're still in what we refer to as our explosive period, which is when we're issuing and inspecting premises that wish to provide fireworks. And we've introduced some changes this year following feedback from last year, and decided to inspect the premises prior to us issuing the licenses, and then as they have received the license, to make sure that they're complying with the license conditions. And we've been working with the traders this year to ensure that the premises can store the safe amount of explosives, which resulted actually in quite a few of them reducing what they were storing. We also continue inspecting our various off licenses, which you would have seen resulted in a number of applications to review premises licenses. And we continue to carry out joint visits to Shisha premises. Very recently, we've had a successful prosecution of a Shisha lounge, which was carrying out unlicensed activities, which was sale of alcohol and providing regulated entertainment without any approvals. And we have had a successful outcome for that, with over £5,000 fine issued to the premises that were providing those unlicensed activities, and full cost of over £2,000 paid back to us as part of this investigation. And unfortunately, I cannot name the name of the premises yet, as we're still in the appeal period, but I thought there was a really good example where our health and safety officers, licensing, and also OPDC from the planning perspective visited together. We all took action, and as a result, the non-compliant with various aspects Shisha Lounge is actually no longer operating in the borough. I've heard that they have moved out of the borough and they operate somewhere else, but at least they're not causing any issues in Ealing, which I think is a very good result. That's on the enforcement side of things, Councillor Kelly. I've got the update on the extra funding. I'm not sure whether you want me to cover that straight away.
Perhaps leave that for the time being, if you don't mind. Maybe come back to it, unless you think perhaps it does sort of impact enforcement directly.
I think it partially does, because obviously what we're hoping to achieve is actually work closer with the police. So it might be good if I covered that side of things for
Carry
all of
on.
the parties.
That'd be good. Thank you. Yeah.
So in March of this year, our colleagues in Public Health Department, they launched what they call the new inequalities bid for the teams across country to deliver innovative proposals to fight health inequalities. So shortly after that, we've submitted 2 bids, one on behalf of the licensing compliance team and one on behalf of our trading standards team. In short, from the trading standard perspective, what we're hoping to deliver is a range of interventions to support the government's efforts in preventing children mainly from having access and taking up vapes, which you probably have seen quite widely publicized as well, and also take further action on illicit tobacco products. On the licensing side of things, what we want to do is establish a partnership group, which would include a number of council departments and also other organizations such as the police, NHS, and others, to tackle the problem that we may have, where we have in certain areas of the borough associated with alcohol misuse and associated with it antisocial behavior and other issues. So what we're really hoping to achieve is to identify key focus areas, target problematic premises, and take action as we did in the case of the Hanwell premises I mentioned before. Both of our bids were successful, which is great, and we secured £200,000 to use over a 3-year period. And I know it sounds like a lot of money, but hopefully what that will allow us to achieve is to onboard 2 part-time or 2 full-time officers, depending on the pay, 1 for trading standards and 1 for licensing, to specifically focus on this work. So what we want to do is carry out some proactive actions, proactive visits, test purchase operations, and kind of license checks, etc., to make sure that we're reducing antisocial behavior associated with our licensed premises. So we're also hoping that by kind of working with other departments that we don't normally work with, we can build a better picture of where kind of alcohol-related issues lay. And we will also want to produce on map on alcohol and drug centres to include as part of our consideration of our new licensing policy, which you will note the work on this will start next year. So that's just in a nutshell what we're planning to achieve as part of that money.
That's good. So I've got no indications, but if I perhaps make a comment, it might get something going. But congratulations to you and to everyone for securing that funding. I know that in itself was a piece of work. So really, it was sort of to ask. It's given opportunity for yourself and Jess to confirm what the hierarchy and the team currently is in licensing, and how that might change quite soon, given this funding. You know, what's our aspiration, perhaps in 3 to 6 months' time? In terms of, yeah, go ahead.
I think it might be actually easy if Jess speaks of the changes, because there's other changes as well going on in the team.
Got
So I'll let
Councillor
Jess
Nand
speak.
afterwards as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Isabella, for that summary, and it was a really good piece of work. So, in effect, in the first instance, obviously, we need to get some role profiles written around these roles and try and do some recruitment. We are looking at recruitment in other roles, and we have some vacancies and things like that as well. We're also just looking at the wider structure of the regulatory services beyond the licensing and trading standards aspect. So, we are doing a little bit of what's the right word? Kind of not restructure per se, more like a rationalizing of some posts and looking at some of our role profiles to make sure that we can recruit, because it is quite a competitive market for recruiting people. And that's kind of what I think Isabella was referencing to in terms of the number of officers, because it depends on what level we can recruit somebody and the amount of resource and training we need to put into new members of staff to do this work, because it's unlikely we'll find kind of qualified officers off the shelf necessarily. So there'll be a little bit of work in that, but once we get that profile, we'll then obviously need to kind of pull the team together and then think about collectively how we're going to approach this. But one of the big aspects, I suppose, around getting the resource and applying to the public health grant around this particular approach, particularly in relation to alcohol and tobacco, is that it's kind of quite undocumented the amount of illicit and counterfeit tobacco and alcohol that's solved, in addition to the issues we're seeing in terms of non-compliant and problematic vaping, some of which probably isn't even legislated against yet, but should be, given how new some of the technology and practices in that space when you get into kind of synthetic cannabinoids and other things like that. So there's a lot of work to do in that space, but we will be developing that approach and making sure it complements our pre-existing provision. So hopefully what you will see is an increase in the overall interventions, which will then hopefully flow through into things like reviews and other stuff eventually for the committee to consider once that work gets there. And some of this then also links back to the partnership work that we're developing with Mr. Lynch and his team, and some of the approaches he's bringing in his new role overseeing Ealing as a borough individually, not as a kind of a tri-borough, as was previously the case, and opportunities for us to work with him, with these new officers, to try and make as big an impact as possible while we have the funding. Councillor Kelly, you're on mute.
I've got Councillor Nan, Councillor Jammer, and Councillor Driscoll. So just before I take Councillor Nan first, because he put his hand up first, Mr. Lynch, Superintendent Lynch, and PC Bradshaw. How might you, how might you fit into you're a new regime? In a sense, the council have got a new regime. This is a really great opportunity having you here. So how do you see your team slotting into the licensing enforcement work that we're doing in the borough? I mean, there's a current objection to attends that's gone in. Obviously, you can't speak particularly about that, but this work does go on. But so, if you could help us, that'd be Mr. Lynch.
Thanks, Councillor Kelly. No problem at all. And
Yeah.
a lovely segue from Jess as well. Hopefully you can hear me. Yeah, I mean, I suppose the first thing is thank you for inviting me to this committee meeting. I'm fully aware I've been in post now since the end of April as the superintendent for Ealing Borough. And licensing and antisocial behaviour and many aspects of crime linked to licensed premises have featured massively, I suppose, in the time that I've already been in post, and you'll know that just from some of the meetings that we've had in the margins as well. I thought that was a really helpful summary from Isabella, demonstrating the strength of some of the great work that's already started, as Jess has alluded to. One of the key focuses, I suppose, of many that I've got at the moment is a bit of a reset and a rebuild, and it's all linked to commitments made out in the New Met for London strategy, which launched earlier, obviously, this year and in August at the Ealing event, of which I co-hosted with the Commissioner. But equally, an awful lot more, I suppose, that goes on in the background to try to operationalise that. So on the call you've got tonight, you've got James and you've got Kaya. And whilst they are part of the existing partnership and prevention team that will be co-located and are co-located in the council, I've already shared with Jess and other partners in the council some of the forward look plans that I have for year 1 and year 3 to operationalise what my contingent will look like within the partnership. So I'm anticipating that there will be an increase in the number of officers that are working within the council match funded teams, I suppose. I mean, I can give you some rough figures. I'm in January, hopefully I will have a new inspector that starts, which is a renewed emphasis, I suppose, on partnership working, of which I've not had before. Councillor, you'll know, and many of the other councillors will know, that Lee Ballard has been the incumbent inspector and has been, I suppose, spreading himself incredibly thinly across the partnership and also on the wards. So I'm grateful that part of the changes that we've already started to implement and make, I've got new people coming in. So there'll be a new inspector that will be working in the partnership post. Kaya, who's online, Kaya Patel, who's the kind of interim sergeant at the moment. I'm sure Kaya will come in a bit later. Kaya is only with us on a short-term basis linked to a rotation, but there will be other substantive sergeants that will be picking up the work around licensing and antisocial behaviour that will be co-located. And then beyond that, in addition to James, who's online as well, I'm expecting at least a team of 8 or 9 other officers that will have various roles, not all of them focused on licensing, but to give them some omnicompetence, 2 specialist licensing officers, and then other officers as well linked to antisocial behaviour and other roles and job descriptions yet to be defined. So not too dissimilar, I suppose, to the pathway that Jess started with some of the funding that they've got in the council. And that's just, I suppose, a little bit of a flavour of some of the work that we've started. I'm also grateful to the Community Safety Partnership for the continuance of the match funded team, which is a terrific investment working in tandem with the council, and no doubt some of their mutual taskings via Jess's team, not just including estates and ASB related matters, but will cross over into licensed premises as well. So gives us that extra help as well. So I'll pause there, but lots going on in summary, I suppose, and an uplift, and I suppose a reset of the partnership going forward.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Councillor Anand. You unmuting your mic? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody, for the presentation. I just going to my question is going to come at the end, but I just want to actually put a bit of background to my question. Basically, it's about the shisha bars and the fines that actually we give them. My concern here is, and I just need clarification here, is that in Park Royal or any industrial area like Perryville, these are unused factory units, industrial units, normally acquired for without any premium. People spend a little bit of money on there, and then they occupy that premises, operate probably without any planning permission. I know PDC are doing good work there. We are also doing good work. But the problem here is that £5,000 fine is a huge amount. But for these operations, that's probably just a day's sale. So do we have any further powers? My question is here, do we have any further powers to charge more than £5,000 persistent people that are actually prepared to break the law and continue to break the law and are prepared to pay the £5,000 fine? So do we have any further powers other than closing down, which might take time? Can we find them more? That's my, thank you.
I think
So,
yes, yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, me and Isabella could do an entire hour conversation just on this topic alone. But in summary, Councillor, no. Just so we're clear, we don't levy the fine. We effectively detect, we identify the offence, and then we take forward the action in terms of a prosecution to the magistrate's court, and the magistrate applies the fine, not us. So it's not something that we have a decision over. That's applied by the court. And those fines are determined by a wider kind of framework of maximum possible fine. So that's all set by statute. It's nothing that we can obviously manage. In a court setting, obviously an operator will come and try and minimize the amount of fine and in particular costs, and we will obviously try and recover all of our costs. Sometimes where there's mitigation, or a person who's being brought before the court might give it reasons or mitigating factors that mean that they reduce the overall fine, or they reduce our overall costs, which is frustrating for us because effectively we're spending public money to bring non-compliant people to court, and then our costs are being let off because effectively somebody's ill or they have some other kind of mitigating factor that they ask the court to consider. But in essence, no. The more times we take them back, obviously it's a cumulative effect. So if you prosecute somebody for the third time, the court will look upon that in a much dimmer view than the first time. But it's still within the same framework of the point you raised with central government. It's not enough of a deterrent. Planning often do take action, and they will take poker action where that's possible, but often that's difficult to do in the context of shisha, I suppose, and is a different process. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Isabella, but in essence, we would love there to be bigger fines, but unfortunately, yes, unless the government changes the legislation, that isn't going to change anytime soon.
I think the only thing I would add to it is we take more of a kind of strategic approach now, and we charge the company that runs the premises as well as the individuals. So I agree with you. That fine, actually, personally, I did think it was quite low. But now we have the director of Dakami personally charged with a licensing offence, so he will have a criminal record, which is quite a big. It will have quite a big impact on that individual. And as I said, this was just a prosecution by the licensing team. Our officers on the health and safety side of things also prosecuted under smoke-free, where there was additional £2,500 fine. And then obviously there were fines and other implications from the planning perspective. So that's the kind of approach that we take now, where all of the teams come together, because none of us, unfortunately, have enough powers in, to deal with it in a way that we perhaps would want to.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Nan, and thank you for your responses. Yeah. We maybe have more time to come back to that, Councillor Nand, if you want to have a supplementary. I'm pretty sure I had Councillor Jammu next. So
you did,
yeah.
Chair.
Thank you very much. I just wanted some clarification from Isabella, please, if you don't mind. You talked about beauty places and how they're not regulated in the same way, and yet they're doing injections and derma fillers and things like that. I mean, what is allowed and what's not allowed? And the other thing was, what's the, I mean, is there a different protocol for people setting up beauty places within their own homes? Because I've seen so much on social media about this kind of stuff lately. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jama. It's a very complicated question, but I'll try to give you a simple answer to it. Unfortunately, quite a few of the activities, such as, for example, injecting dermal fillers and Botox, are not licensable. So we don't have any legal powers to do anything with them. But the changes and the consultation that I was mentioning is very much intended at bringing all of those new, weird and wonderful, I'll just call them like that, ways and beauty activities under the licensing regime, which at the moment we cannot do. And in terms of people operating from homes, you'll be probably aware that where the activities that are licensable, we can either license an individual or the premises. So it's quite likely that the person that you're talking about, they may have a license, or it might be that we're not even aware that they are practicing. So that's why the government is taking a quite a more stricter approach, because they're recognizing that A, there's a lot more people that want those services, so it's definitely a growing sector, and B, there is also different activities now. Some of the things that I'm hearing about, I have to say my head is exploding, because I would never think about doing things like that. But we do have people now that you can have someone going on eBay, purchasing some fillers and then filling in, into different parts of the body, completely unregulated. And like I said, we haven't got any powers to do anything with it, which is why the government is consulting on it. Hopefully that answers it for you.
Thank you.
I think Councillor Driscoll has established that he was next by putting his camera on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just discussing the new projects and the partnership role, because it sort of in the outline mentions the sort of health-related consequences of excessive alcohol consumption, but the actual project is about, I suppose, monitoring access and purchasing and regulation of alcohol. So, I mean, I know some of these activities take place at present, but is this to just ramp up some of this enforcement and monitoring work? And I'm quite conscious, like, it's a 3-year funding. So how will, because this is the work that's listed and the goals and the outcomes will probably have to be ongoing to still be present and still be monitored going forward. So just managing how we can see the longevity, or will we be reliant on a further period of 3 years or whatever funding options are available to keep this work going at maybe the same level? Or is it this to kickstart more intensive work, just to try and clarify how this is going? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Driscoll. So you're right, it is partially to ramp up what we're doing because our resources are quite scarce. But some of the things we're planning to do as part of this project, for example, establish an alcohol partnership group, that's the sort of thing that will stay on, and hopefully, all of the partners on part of that group will be able to influence how we do the things in the future. The other part of it is you hear at the next licensing committee meeting that we are planning our new licensing policy. So all of the work that the group will start doing, things like identifying where do we have alcohol treatment centers, that will stay on, which obviously will provide, again, that longevity. And from the tobacco perspective, I'm not sure whether you've seen, but the government has actually announced quite a bit of funding to local government. And it's very likely that there will be other kind of legislative changes. So the trading standards work definitely will be picked up through centrally funded government funding, which will stay on. And then on the licensing side of things, like I said, we will see how successful this project is, and hopefully we can get further funding. If we don't, then hopefully what we'll develop as part of it now will stay on and will inform future decisions.
I would just add to that as well, Isabella. Another part of this, Councillor, is trying to, so as public health, obviously spend a lot of time trying to understand and project kind of health implications into the future. particularly in a health inequality setting. So, for example, they base a lot of their assessments on future need from a critical health perspective in the NHS from the amount of people that smoke, because obviously that's the key kind of driver of ill health often. So part of what we want to do in this context and how I've pitched this to public health,
Yes,
we'll have
yeah,
Isabella's.
a bit grisly. You were a bit grisly there with.
I'll switch my camera off. Is that better, Councillor Kelly?
Yeah, it's almost it's back as your headset, sir. Just perhaps. Don't know.
Okay, I'll keep trying. But in effect, what I was trying to say is some of what we're trying to do here is to effectively get an insight into the volume of tobacco and counterfeit alcohol being consumed to try and help public health get an understanding of the quantum of the challenge around smoking, vaping, and counterfeit and illicit alcohol that's sold in the borough to help them predict and understand the size and the quantum of the challenge, which will hopefully help them make better estimates in future when they start to think about, smoking cessation or the effect of smoking in terms of NHS need and demand and things like that. So there is a kind of informative kind of data aspect that will come out of this intensive period of doing a focus on seizures and identifying this kind of practice.
Thank you very much, Jess. I'm sure what you said was quality, but I think anybody watching online might need to clean up the audio there.
Couldn't hear properly. Yeah, couldn't hear.
Yeah, thank you, Kat. Right. I've got Councillors Ball and Shaw. I'm going to. Councillor Shaw believes he's next, so go ahead, sir. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I hope I didn't jump in there putting my
I think that was right. Yeah.
Camera on. I just really wanted to highlight a point in Isabella's report, which I thought was very good. On page 14, she referred to the seizures of a sort of an alarming amount of unregulated pharmaceuticals. Certainly, it's come up on a couple of panels that I've sat on where the usual, the sort of the spirits not duty paid or whatever has that hasn't been the problem, and instead it has either been tobacco or unregulated pharmaceuticals either brought in illegally from abroad or being sold under the counter, as it were, without license. And I just wondered if Isabella could sort of outline any more of that, if she believes that this is sort of typical of what's being seen, or perhaps some of the colleagues from the police might be able to comment further on it, and whether it's something that a future sort of project or operation might look at targeting.
You might want to add poppy seeds to your response as well, because that's.
If I have to, Councillor Kelly, yes, yeah. I can do that. Thank you, Councillor Shaw. So in regards to your question whether this is typical, unfortunately it is. Yes, there was a huge number of tablets, but sometimes with our seizures, it's a bit of a pot of luck. Depends where we find at the premises. We've always been finding that those kind of illicit tablets and oral jelly packs, etc., during our seizures, but that one was quite significant. This one specific resulted because we've used sniffer dogs. So I think I recall that one of the premises we went to was actually a laundrette, which our licensing officer would never go there themselves if it wasn't for the fact that our sniffer dog has sniffed out things that shouldn't be there. So I'm happy to provide you with kind of more details over the past years, how much we found, but I know that specific part actually was picked up by quite a number of newspapers, etc., as it was quite a big seizure. But unfortunately, it's not unusual. We do find that many tablets, etc., that shouldn't be in there. And in regards to the poppy seeds, so Councillor Kelly highlighted that quite often as part of our evidence, we put in that our officers seize poppy seeds. And you've asked a really right question as to, is it illegal or is it not? And it's not a straightforward answer, but in essence, poppy seeds, as you would probably have used them in cooking, etc., they are legal. So you can go to a shop and buy poppy seeds. But what our officers are quite often finding is the grinded powder as a result of kind of grinding the poppy seeds. And our officers suspect that it's being used as snuff, which is something that can be ingested nasally. And why SNAF is legal, it's subject to quite heavy regulations, and the ones that we always find, they're not labeled. So when we ask our operators what is it, they can't answer. So it just kind of gets picked up with everything else that we seize, because quite often those operations are quite hectic, and our officers take the view of seizing everything that they presume to be illegal, and then if it's not, then we release it. So I think, Councillor Kelly, you'll probably see that there's going to be less poppy seed in the reports going forward, because we've kind of discussed it, that perhaps it's not as high on the agenda as it should be.
Yeah, it's only just, you know, as a licensing subcommittees, we want stuff that we can hang our hats on decision wise, and unfortunately, poppy seeds. Whilst I completely agree that an operator is selling them with a particular purpose and not for cooking, it can't really form part of our decision making. The same way, if somebody may not have a planning application, an appropriate planning application, it's not a reason for us not to give a licensing. You know, so it's a similar thing. We
Yeah,
want
exactly.
we
Yeah.
want to have information that means we can make good decisions on. So that's helpful. But obviously, if something is not labelled, it can be confiscated, and
It's a food safety issue as well, so
yes,
that's why.
and operators, when you say you hand it back, do you hand it back, or do they have to ask for it?
It depends what it is, obviously, and if it is something that appears. So we have seen on occasions things that appear to us to be illicit, and then we get the brand representatives to assess, and they say no, it is, you know, it's perfectly legal, and we would then return it to them.
And you do that as a matter of course. Yeah.
I presume so. Yes.
Okay, that's good. Councillor Ball, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I welcome the significant improvement in the police investment in licensing. And I'd like to raise a few concerns that have cropped up over the last couple of years, really, in licensing hearings. So one is that sometimes the evidence submitted by the police has been quite limited, and it hasn't included the text of the specific crime reports. Other times, the police have submitted evidence in advance, but no officers attended the hearing. And often the body-worn camera footage of police has been lost, which would prove very useful, as there's often a disagreement between regarding what happened at a premises visit where there's a licensing officer and police officers present, and the license holder disagrees with the licensing officer about what happened. So could Superintendent Lynch reassure residents that these sorts of issues should stop happening going forward?
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Good question. Thank you. And many questions. But so it's interesting to hear that in terms of historical cases over the last couple of years, you know, and I've made it very clear since joining in April that there's a lot to be done, and there's also a lot of a reset to be done. You know, Jess and some of the community safety colleagues on the call will know the extent of which I am really challenging in terms of internally, in terms of what that looks like, in terms of officer numbers, our commitment towards the partnership, how we interoperate, not just in the licensing team in the council, but also how we have more capacity, I suppose, with the ward officers going out there and conducting licensing visits. People have the right training, they're aware of the legislation and all of the things that you've talked about there, which is good basic practice in terms of evidence gathering. So, you know, I'm aware of the scale of the issue. And you've got my commitment. I made my commitment at the new Met for London. I'm here for 2 years to deliver these changes, and I will do that. And that's part of the work I'm doing with the co-location of the teams in the council setting. And there's a myriad of other elements of work which I'm working on. All will have a benefit in local communities and hotspot locations, and also town centres. So, but yeah, I envisage, Councillor Ball, that you will see a degree of expertise and knowledge that maybe hasn't been there, and also a bit of consistency, because a lot of this is around expertise and knowledge. We've heard how well, you know, Isabella talks about the great work that's happening locally, you know, and I pose that question to myself and to my team. Have we really had that consistent approach in licensing for Ealing over a number of years? Because my corporate memory is from Northwest London. I had a really good, strong licensing team co-located in Brent Civic Centre, working on the National Stadium, doing Shisha visit work, you know, and really good collaborative working. So I know what we should be setting as a benchmark. I do think there's a long way to go, but notwithstanding that, my commitment's there, and I know Keir and James are very passionate about licensing, and so we'll work with you in this committee and Councillor Kelly to try to get us into that position. So I may default here to Keir and to James because they may practically want to share some information with you as well.
Yeah, James, you might want to chime in, mate, if there's anything else. But I'll happy to add in a little bit. And thank you, Councillor Ball, for that question. I guess just on a real practical level, I spent 6 months working as a response inspector, and from the perspective of the body worn video, for us to actually save that data, because of the wide variety of GDPR that goes into it, as you can imagine, we have to have a legal reason to store that data. Now, if a licensing officer is going out to a premises, as James does, often going there with a body worn video and what have you can be quite challenging for officers, and it can pose quite an officer safety risk, because they're highlighted straight away as police officers. Often when it's meetings, we won't have body worn videos on, and James will probably come in to correct me here. What I would say from a response perspective, when officers do turn up at licensing premises, their body worn cameras usually go on because that's one of our biggest areas to protect us. However, once the recording happens, we have to have a reason to keep that recording. We can't just keep it because we want to keep it. So if we go to a licensing venue, and I'll give you some examples. If we go to a licensing venue, there's been some sort of assault or some sort of criminality, the recording will go on, it will get associated with the crime report, it will stay on. If we go to a licensing venue and there's no offences apparent and we've moved people on, then we can't then store that body worn video. And that's the difficulty that we have. I'm not saying, and please don't think I'm making excuses here, I'm not. I'm just trying to add some balance, I guess, in terms of some of the challenges my colleagues in the frontline policing world have on a daily basis. And James might want to add in some other bits if I've missed off.
I mean, just sort of, so an example where you wouldn't keep on body camera officers would be if you go in on a joint visit with the licensing authority, or indeed on your own, and you found some non-duty paid cigarettes. That would that be enough to keep? Because, or is that not criminal? That wouldn't be enough to capture the data?
Councillor Kelly, if you don't mind, I'll bring in James because
yeah,
James is much more experienced on this side than I am.
What's the
yeah, so in that particular incident, of course, I would be storing that body worn video because it's part of the prosecution, something that's being an ongoing investigation into that individual case. What we're more talking about is work done by other officers that aren't necessarily involved in licensing, who might attend a venue, they might put on a crime report, but if that crime report is if the investigation is closed off, it's not being progressed to court, then the body worn video would expire after 31 days. And often in licensing, we're coming back and trying to look at that evidence at a later date when we get to the enforcement stage, where it's already expired. So yes, if the work that I'm doing, and if I'm recording video, such as attending the shisha lounges, etc., then that will be saved and will be there. But anything from other officers, not so much, and I simply don't have the capacity to be able to check every single bit of body worn that goes on for the whole of the Met.
I mean, we've got to remember, councillors, that condition in most venues most premises is to have CCTV anyway. So, and it's often the case where non-compliance is alleged. Part of that non-compliance is the absence of CCTV or CCTV. So we have to take the decisions based on what they, what their breaches are. Okay, John, did you want to explore that theme a bit more? Because I think it's quite a good question. No, John, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, you already followed up on the body worn body worn camera footage, and I think yeah. So the point that you were making is the key thing. Really, certainly in quite a lot of cases, it's about the joint visits between our officers and police officers that are part of a process which may lead to a review of the license. So it's not a criminal prosecution, but it is something where the evidence can be very useful with, things like, as you gave the example of non-duty paid cigarettes, or it might be non-duty paid bottles of alcohol, or sales to minors, or sales of single cans that are against licensing conditions, all those sorts of things, sales out of hours. So it's not things which are necessarily right at the top of the agenda of most serious crimes, but they are things which can lead to a licensing review. So I think it would be important to have that evidence kept in those cases.
I think I'd support Councillor Ball. I think it'd be very helpful. Having that officer, where a warranted officer has captured something on a premises is something that we've got to consider very highly. Jess, you wanted to comment on that?
The only thing can you hear me okay now, Councillor Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, last time.
Am I still a Dalek?
You can watch it on YouTube when you get but yeah, that's much better. You're a bit loud, a bit, yeah, but it's okay.
Okay. So the only thing I would add, I suppose, is I think that's a great suggestion from Councillor Ball. I think if you kind of take the points that Sean has made and I've made in terms of the developing of the approach, part of this is developing the wider practice, and some of that is Isabella and the team supporting James and the new officers to effectively start to roll out some of the knowledge to other officers and build the capacity, build the understanding, build the confidence of not just staff working within licensing, but the wider kind of officer group, both from a policing and council perspective, so that we are maximizing outcomes and we're able to kind of tool and train everybody up to see the signs and know when to capture stuff and send it through. But some of that will take a little bit of time and work, and hopefully the structure Sean's outlined and some of the additional funding Isabella's highlighted that we've achieved will enable us to kind of build that resilience and approach. It's also worth noting Paul's community safety team did its first review of a premise over the course of the end of the summer, and that was really about linking back that persistent street drinking challenge to specific premises, which they were able to evidence with the help of the local SNT police teams and some of the parks patrol teams that we have, as well as some of the ASB officers' work trying to deal with persistent problematic street drinking behaviours. So that is a new thing that the team have delivered, and it's something that we want to build on. But again, it's about capacity as well. Those guys have already got quite a bit of work on their plate. So we will start to try and develop that approach to make sure that the community safety team is supporting and complementing the local policing team and the licensing guys and Isabella's service to look at where we've got ingrained challenges around problematic drinking, to make sure that we're trying to tackle them at source, as well as challenge the behaviours in the community through things like the borough-wide PSPO and other tools that we have in that space.
I mean, obviously I don't want to talk too much about this, but having said that, I mean, I'll give an example now. I think it was Councillor Blacklini and I think it was Councillor Ball, Downtown Groceries. It was granted in full, an off license, and there was an objection from the police, but there was no supporting evidence. There was no camera footage. It was sort of anecdotal that there's a lot of street drinking in the area. So when we want to make the decisions, we need to have the supporting evidence. And I think it was a period of time where there was no staff, or we had 6 months of no staff coming out of COVID. It was a variation of things, people leaving, people coming. But we would hope when a new application is put in and the police want to make objections, representations, that it's supported with crime reference numbers, reports from residents, partnership work with Park Guard and safer neighbourhood teams. So that's what I would hope to see going forward.
Councillor Kelly, I don't disagree at all. I mean, that's how it should operate and function. So you relay what a normal partnership should look like, I suppose. And so, yeah, absolutely. And that's my frame of reference as well. So, and I made some comments in the chat, which I suppose in response to what Councillor Ball said, and I agree entirely. And I think if we just rely on the officers working within the hub alongside Isabella, then we will immediately fail. And so the next step, and the mantle I suppose I give that partnership inspector when they start in January, is this is my vision for licensing and what it should look like, which is very akin to your vision, Councillor. Go and make it deliverable for me effectively, and that will mean other teams. There's 685 officers that work within response setting across the whole of West area. And my question to them would be, how many of you have done a licensing visit alongside my licensing teams in the last 2 years? Bearing in mind, we've talked about that time period already in this session. And it would be very revealing, I suspect, if I was to ask that question. So, and then I suppose the next question I would ask is, how many of you feel comfortable conducting a really viable licensing visit? And do you know what you're doing? So all of those things around the culture and training will need to have a bit of a step change, I think, in summary. But yeah, I'm all with you on this, I have to say.
Well, it's just, I mean, that was the 8th of March. That was at the top, downtown groceries. But if we then go to the 25th of October, every day is 159, that was very evidenced, you know, so we refused the license because there was good supporting evidence. So, you know, we have been moving in the right direction in recent months.
That's positive. I do see peaks and troughs, and obviously the community safety team see me probably in operation most days. But I mean, I think, you know, I won't stress it, but they know my commitment to the partnership, and I will take on those difficult conversations internally, and I continue to do so. I see the value in licensing and tackling licensing activity and the benefits across crime and antisocial behaviour. So it's for me to make sure that I follow that pathway locally, internally as well.
That's what the licensing objectives are, aren't they? To minimise, to promote, you know, the absence of antisocial behaviour. I've got some chats here, but that's stuff from Councillor Superintendent Ball. Just bear in mind that the text doesn't get broadcast, but we've picked up on it as well. Any other questions to the police members? Around the room? No. Thank you very much. I mean, just sort of looking at the hearings, we brushed on them, talked about them. It's been very helpful to have members come forward the way they have. I mean, there's a few premises here where over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, I've actually seen them in one way or the other in front of me 3 or 4 times in some cases. And whilst I was available to sit on them, I thought it was better that a fresh councillor sits on them. So I think that's important. But I can only do that if you members continue to come forward as you're doing, and there's always more for people to do if they want, just to get in contact. I think that's it, Cornelia. Unless it's the work programme next.
Yes, the work programme report. If we're ready for that.
Do anyone any? Sorry, Councillor Praveen, did you want to say something? I didn't quite understand that message. Councillor Anand.
Hello.
Yes. What would you like, sir?
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to add one thing for something for future, the future program. I'm not talking about program. I'm actually talking about policy. That if we can amend our Ealing council policy that we only accept applications that actually have planning permission, then we would be in a very much stronger position to control.
Yeah. I have a feeling we can't do that, but Alison, there we are.
No,
Alison,
unfortunately, you can't do that.
As well as a license.
No, there's no restriction on if a licensing application comes before you and it hasn't yet got planning permission, then there isn't a way of saying no, we're not going to consider it. What you can do is give a strong indication that it would be preferable to for the planning side to be sorted out in advance, but as I say, there's no way you can actually say we're not going to determine this.
But it's often the case, Praveen. Let me just posit this. So when a premises comes in front of us that may not have a planning application, and it's always stated, somebody says it, in the meeting, whoever's doing representation, and I always have to reply, quite rightly, we can't consider it. And I don't use that as a decision-making body, but it's often the case that something that may not have planning may not actually have the right building configuration that lends its support to a good licensing function. So a warehouse that is still a warehouse can't perhaps have a proper dispersal policy, and that for me is, that building does not appear to be safe, have a dispersal, and that is very much part of a licensing consideration. Would you agree, Alison?
Well, the licensing, the planning team are a responsible authority, and they do get consulted. And it's and we've discussed before about the fact that there tends not to be too much of a response, when actually they do quite often hold some quite useful information, often that would be directly relevant to licensing considerations. So I think that is something we can do as well, is to continue to try and sort of make sure to build that relationship, so we do get a better response to that consultation, because they tend not to respond when it would actually be quite useful to you.
That application will get the message then. Go ahead, Councillor Anand.
Back in, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to ask whether we, as a responsible licensing body, whether we can set a policy, whether it's not set in statute but whether we can, as a Ealing Council licensing responsible body, set a policy where we will not accept any applications if they don't have a.
Yeah, but is that's
in short, no.
There's policy, but I mean, we can make recommendations in our policy, but we can't not accept it as an application, because therefore then it's not a policy thing, it becomes a statutory thing. So you know what I mean? So if it ticks the boxes,
in essence, you can't write a policy that contradicts national legislative requirements, and the national legislative requirements require us to determine the application. So your policy won't overrule what's been agreed in Parliament.
We can look at having aspirations in our policy, certainly, Councillor Anand, and that aspiration could be.
We can't overrule statute, so I understand that. Thank you.
But I think it's a very, we can think about the wording, aspiration. We can add that perhaps to our work programme. Isabella?
Councillor, thank you. I just wanted to add, so when the premises apply for the licenses, you've mentioned some of the things about the structure of the premises. So the applications do go to our health and safety team, so they get reviewed quite often. We are picking up potentially some fire safety issues. Fire brigade is included in all of the new applications. They are listed as a responsible authority. I myself have made a number of referrals of specific premises to them. And I think it might be actually useful to see if we could invite them to come to the licensing committee, because I do feel that in a number of circumstances, it would be useful for them to actually review those applications as well.
I quite agree.
I would echo Councillor Chair. Sorry, I would echo that as well. I think they add massive value. In previous partnerships in other boroughs, they've been incredibly helpful to help with the enforcement element, and obviously protection of lives and everything else, and the ancillary benefits we get from their support as well. Yeah, brilliant.
Thank you, Superintendent. Okay, right. I'm going to go to the work program now. So thank you very much. We have meeting 3 of the municipal year. So that will be, it's scheduled for Tuesday, the 20th of February. So hold that date in your diary. Currently, we're going to have the license and hearing enforcement report. Obviously, what form that takes may change slightly, but it will be an update. We also, if you recall last year, we did have an update from the OPDC, the Old Oak Park World Development Corporation. That's going to be an update on shisha premises and the OPDC. We might be able to include and supplement that with what we were just talked about with the fire team, so that perhaps that could figure as part of that. We'll work on that. The councillors Bull, Jammu, and the officers, and then we also have hoping to have an update on the evening and nighttime economy strategy in the borough. To update councillors on the regime and its impact on stakeholders, on the progress of the new ENTE strategy document. Can you just, that's evening and nighttime economy, yes, ENTE, which is sort of under the decent living incomes portfolio. And then we will also have another meeting on Tuesday, the 7th of May. So obviously you've got all that in front of you, but that will be it, Tuesday, the 20th of February. So Cornelia, do we have anything outstanding?
No, Councillor Kelly, I think that's everything.
So thank you very much for everyone attending, in particular Superintendent Lynch, Sergeant Patel, and where's he gone now?
PC James Bradshaw.
Yeah. So looking around, and thank you for, and we hope, we don't need the cavalry come in every time, but I think it's important to have a regular attendance as opposed to a large attendance, because I know you've got a lot of challenges and you're being pulled in every direction. We do understand that as local councillors. So thank you, and I'll see some of you at licensing subcommittees, and I'll see you all here on Tuesday, the 20th of February. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Joe.